Welcome back to another animation breakdown. April Fools, everyone. We are, of course, not actually covering Dragon Ball Super today. If you couldn't tell already, we're diving into Dragon Ball GT for what will probably just be a one-off since it felt appropriate for Super's finale, but we'll see depending on the reception. Maybe I'll tackle some special episodes from the various series here and there. But without further ado, let's jump in with a little bit of context for GT. The series was a pretty interesting case in that despite being its own thing, as in it didn't have a source manga, it debuted as though it were just Dragon Ball Z episode 292 just 1 week after Z's final episode. It had essentially the same production staff. Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru continued as character designer from the Buu arc, the same studios and their animators continued pretty much the same, albeit with a couple of switch-ups like Toshiyuki Kano taking over from Yukio Ebisawa. The only significant changes came with the series director and writer positions. Aya Matsui took over from Takao Koyama on the writing front, though she pretty much gave up this position at the exact point the Baby arc started, with Atsushi Maekawa writing the vast majority of the series from that point onwards, including the TV special. In an interview with the show's producer, Kozo Morishita, he revealed that the team came up with a rough plan for the first arc in its entirety, but by the time the third script was totally complete, they decided that this space adventure low-stakes approach wasn't actually very good, and immediately changed gears in favour of action. Whether it's that deciding factor that pushed Matsui away from the show, we don't know for sure, but it does seem telling that Maekawa kinda unofficially stole her position once the Baby arc began. I don't think that's a comment on either of their skills. Matsui is a remarkable talent, currently leading Pokemon Sun and Moon's writing, and Maekawa was the series composer for the 2011 adaptation of Hunter x Hunter. Ultimately, I think it's just down to different tastes and interests, and clashing with what the higher-ups deemed best for the brand. The director of the show was Osamu Kasai, and he's most famous for directing a lot of mech, or at least space-based anime, and I think the overall atmosphere of GT is very much his doing. There's this darkness and grit to the visuals that never really goes away even once they leave space. Much in the same way Tatsuya Nagamine brought about a big visual change for Dragon Ball Super, Kasai seemed to do the same for Dragon Ball. Unfortunately, I do think that dingy 90s space anime aesthetic really does date the show and doesn't quite fit seamlessly with the timeless aesthetic found in the original series. I think that's why you hear a lot of tales about people seeing GT out of context and assuming it was some sort of prequel because, frankly, it just looks older. In every interview post-GT, there's this overwhelming sense that the production team really wasn't sure what to do with the series, and I think that's very much a part of why, even if you enjoy the show, it's hard to argue that there's not this real disconnect between arcs and stylistic incongruity with both the story it's telling and what's found in the previous series. I bring this all up because it is Matsui and Kasai in the script and direction roles for this episode. So with that bit of background out of the way, and that was quite a ramble, I do apologise, let's dive into the animation specifics of episode 1. This was supervised by Kazuya Hisada of Studio Seigasha, who you may know as the superstar studio on Dragon Ball Z, and that's very much true of their work on GT too. What's interesting is that Hisada and Shimanuki used to alternate supervisory roles on Z, but Shimanuki is only ever a key animator on GT. In the chief animation supervisor role, we have another supervisor, Naoki Miyahara. Unless I'm misremembering, this is actually the only episode of GT to have a credited chief supervisor. I think much in the same way Tadayoshi Yamamura corrected most of Super's first episode, the idea here was to ensure the opener looked as polished as possible. Miyahara's corrections absolutely dominate this episode, to the point that Hisada really feels like an afterthought. Stylistically, he's pretty close to the model sheets, but his slightly pointed ears and large boat-shaped noses are plain to see. The episode opens with a pretty crazy fight between Goku and Oob, and I think the debris that explodes into view in the very first cut is the best way Masahiro Shimanuki could have ever announced his arrival on the series. This scene is him through and through, and I think for many people familiar with his work on Super, this style, the gestures, and the general timing on show here is very much in line with his work on the latter half of that series. You can see the almost puppet-like poses and snappy movement, and and of course that trademark debris, again, that is all over the beam struggle. This is a pretty lengthy and complex scene, and I think it serves as a nice and familiar opening to bridge the action in Z and this brand new series. Following this, as Pilaf hops out of the robot from the shock of the explosion, Naoki Tate pops up with a nice bit of character acting and mech animation. This is obviously a lot jerkier than the Tate many people know today, but the actual gestures and the drawing and the cute little hands in particular are very much in line with his contemporary output. It's a short scene, but it's very competently executed, so no complaints from me. Later on, Pilaf pops up again, and the old superior of the Seigasha gang, Tomokichi Takeuchi, appears to animate this nice little bit of character acting as they discover the Black Star Dragon Balls. It's fairly heavily corrected by Hisada since Takeuchi's style isn't exactly known for being too great, but the movements here are competent enough. The actual summoning of Shenlong is really frustrating, and I have no idea as to who animated it. The effects work as the balls start to activate look lovely, and Shenlong actually manifests himself out of a lightning bolt and curves all around the palace. I have to say, this cut is drastically lacking in in-betweens. It is very jerky, which is a real shame considering these keys really do look so nice. The next scene where Goku shows up and blocks the missiles has been really heavily corrected by Miyahara, so again I'm afraid I don't know exactly who animated it, but it's one of the more competent scenes in this episode. The pristine movement aside, there are some terrific impact frames as Goku comes into contact with each missile. It's a very modern feeling scene and definitely one of the highlights here. At this point, it is time for Goku to become a kid, and this is definitely where the strengths of Kasai's storyboard come into play. Shenlong peering through the arches as Goku's trying to process what's happening is seriously ominous. This scene is animated by Kazuya Hisada, so you've got an awesome bit of character acting with Pilaf packed with competent lightning bolts before the main event comes in as Goku turns into a child. There's bolts everywhere, there's impact frames, there's morphing. This is a great scene that I guess really sets the tone for what GT is about to be. Heading into the second half, we're back down on the ground as a bunch of bank robbers start firing at police. I have to say the scene is really bizarre in terms of how it's constructed between animators. The shots of the actual robbers firing their guns don't seem to be from Shimenuki, but the actual follow-up where the debris is scattering around the ground is 100% him, particularly the end of this scene where the roof falls in on Goku. You can see his effects and of course the almost robotic shaking limbs. The thing is, the actual smoke in the background of the scene where the effects are exploding don't look like Shimenuki at all, particularly those little explosions. It's almost like someone did the first layer of this scene and then Shimenuki animated the debris on top. This is something that does happen, but it is unusual. I guess it makes sense considering just how much he'd done for this episode already, but it did leave me and DB Animators, another animation YouTuber you may know, racking our brains trying to find out who the hell did what. For me, the simplest answer is always the truest answer, but in this case, I really don't see there being any other options. From here on out, it's pretty smooth sailing. As Pan pops up, it is Naoki Tate who appears once again to animate her kicking a rock at one of the robbers. Like I said before, his work's much snappier than his modern efforts, but the cool impact frames and general poses are clear as day and pretty damn effective. Next up is the star of the show though. Naotoshi Shida steps in to animate Goku and Pan taking down these thieves. It starts off with the robber trying to punch Goku, and you can see Shida's detailed ears that really haven't changed that much over the years. As Pan swoops in, Shida's forte for animating multiple characters comes into play, but it's the moment where Pan rushes through the gunfire and punches the robber right through a pillar that is quintessentially Shida, showcasing many of his modern traits, and it is the strongest bit of animation in this episode. Background animation, cool camera work, interesting debris, perfectly smooth timing, and lovely artwork. It is pretty damn great, and it's also the last bit of real animation in this episode, so it's definitely a great way to wrap things up. GT is not a series with much animation. It is one that leans very heavily on its artwork, and with few exceptions, it is definitely the most consistent looking one out of them all. Episode 1 is a good exception to that rule. It has a good chunk of movement, it looks great. Considering how mixed the rest of the series is, I think many people do agree that its first episode is at the very least well executed. I think if I were to touch on GT again, I would probably only look at episode 27 and possibly its last one. Like I said, this isn't the most animated series in the world. It's definitely one that warrants more discussion over its narrative than its visual one. I hope you enjoyed this though, and if these one-off looks at certain episodes interests you, then let me know. Maybe I could start up a series called Dissecting the Greats and break down the best episodes of all different types of series. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this little April Fool's video. Be sure to rate the video and let me know. Subscribe if you're new, and of course let me know your opinions on GT in the comment section below, and I will see you next time.